Scott. I don't think too much of it, but I do enjoy it.
Good evening. Welcome to Sacramento Local Agency Formation Commission, dated Wednesday, November 6th, 2019. This meeting is called to order, and I would like to invite the clerk to please call the roll.
Commissioner Aquino?
Here.
Little? Here. Frost?
Here.
Jones? Here. Thank you. We have a quorum.
Thank you, and please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This meeting of the Local Agency Formation Commission is cablecast live on Metro Cable 14, the local government affairs channel on Comcast, Consolidated Communications, and AT&T Uverse. The meeting is also webcast at sacmetrocable.tv. Today's meeting will be repeated Saturday, November 9 at 2 p.m. and Sunday, November 10 at 9 a.m. on Channel 14. This meeting is also closed captioned. We ask that you please turn off your cell phones and noise-making devices. Speaker slips are located at the back on the table in the back of the room and at the front podium. Please fill them out and hand them to the clerk, Diane Thorpe. Thank you. At this time, I'll invite anyone who has public comment from the floor for any item that is not on the agenda. I do not have any slips, and I don't see a whole lot of people out in the audience clamoring to speak. And so we will move to our next item, consent calendar. If the clerk would please read the first item.
We have just approve the meeting minutes, the claims dated through October 31st, and the monthly budget report.
Okay, so.
I'll move adoption of the consent calendar.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, and please vote. It's unanimous with those present. And next item, please.
Next item, we have a presentation. It's the Regional Water Authority given by James Pfeiffer.
Good evening, Chair, members of the Commission. Just by way of introduction this evening, we have no projects pending that this presentation is meant to address, but what it is providing, periodically we have folks with a regional understanding of issues come to the Commission to have the opportunity for back and forth conversations. Jim's the Executive Director of the Regional Water Authority, amalgamation of water providers within the County of Sacramento, and the region, I should say. So what we can do this evening is we have a fairly light agenda. We can take the presentation. You've been provided copies of this PowerPoint. And I think as we go along with something, if there's some points that are raised you'd like to have more further discussed, that would be appropriate as well. We also have staff, Dave Underwood from the Sac County Water Agency, if any questions kind of cross over from one to the other as far as dealing with groundwater discussions and generally water planning throughout the county. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, or else just turn it over to Jim.
Seeing no questions, thank you, Don, and thank you, Jim, for being here tonight.
Thank you, Chair Frost and Commissioners. I'm pleased to be here tonight to give a presentation on groundwater management. I'd like to introduce a couple colleagues of mine. Daryl Eck is the Executive Director of the Sacramento Central Groundwater Authority. Linda Dorn from the Sacramento County Water Agency, who has a number of groundwater management responsibilities too. Dave Underwood from the Sacramento County Water Agency. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit tonight about water supply for the region, who pumps groundwater, who manages groundwater. We're going to talk a little bit about the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and the integration of land use and water supply. On the map that you see there are, and it's hard to see, there are a number of water agencies. Those are the water agencies that are within the Regional Water Authority, the organization that I am the executive director of. The RWA is a joint powers authority, which serves the interest of 21 member agencies within the Sacramento region. You'll see that the city of Yuba City is one of our members. It's the most distant from this building, newest member. But it goes from Yuba City to the Sacramento County Water Agency to the south, West Sacramento to the west, and El Dorado Irrigation District and Placer County Water Agency to the east. With this, you see a picture, an aerial view of Folsom Reservoir, and you can see the trace of the American River going through the urbanized area of Sacramento, and you can see the Sacramento River sort of winding down near the left side of the diagram. There are a number of surface water diversions for this region. That's what the little dots represent. Usually those are at some surface water treatment plant. They divert the water from either the American River or the Sacramento River. This region also relies quite a bit on groundwater. There's a little bit of recycled water production that occurs in this region too. City of Roseville, El Dorado Irrigation District. I think Sacramento County Water Agency is a recycled water user too. So who pumps groundwater? Lots of people. So many of the municipal agencies that you saw on one of those previous maps, but it also includes park districts, sometimes cemetery districts. There's a great deal of independent pumping within the region. That might be ag-res pumpers, people who have their own wells, and we have a little bit of agriculture within this region too. Actually, a fair amount of agriculture if you include the Natomas Basin and areas south. Who manages groundwater? It's helpful to understand the context of how it gets managed and where it gets managed before we talk about who manages it. So under SGMA, that was a law passed in 2014, and I'm going to talk more about that, but the intent of that law was to manage groundwater at the sub-basin level, and there's 4 sub-basins within Sacramento County. They extend beyond the county lines. The area north of the American River goes clear to the Bear River. It's called the North American Sub-Basin. There's a basin south of the American River, the South American Sub-Basin. There's the Consumnes, and there's a Solano Basin, which extends into Solano County, it looks like, and to just outside of Yolo County. Actually, I'm going to take that back. It includes Yolo County. You see that West Sacramento is part of that from that map. SGMA requires that groundwater sustainability agencies manage groundwater. Groundwater sustainability agencies were put in place as an act of the legislature. It was within the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which was passed in 2014. I'm going to get to this in another slide, but you can have several groundwater sustainability agencies in a particular sub-basin. I represent, or I'm the executive director of the Sacramento Groundwater Authority, which represents or manages the groundwater basin or a portion of the groundwater basin in the North American Basin from the American River to the Sacramento County line. I'll have a map on that in just a minute. Under SGMA, what you're supposed to do, or what groundwater sustainability agencies are supposed to do, is prepare what's called groundwater sustainability plans. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the timing of that later on in the presentation. There's other entities that manage groundwater too. For example, wells are permitted by the County Environmental Management Department. A little bit about the Sacramento Groundwater Authority. Here are the water districts that overlie the Sacramento Groundwater Authority. The Sacramento Groundwater Authority was established in 1998. It was a joint powers authority. It was established to manage groundwater in the North American Basin, or at least a portion of it. It is the underlying powers of that are the police powers that were pooled by the cities of Sacramento, the city of Citrus Heights, the city of Folsom, and Sacramento County. The way that works is those agencies appoint members to the Sacramento Groundwater Authority Board, and you see the members here for the water district. It also includes agriculture and independent pumping. Those are members that were, or slots that were part of the board that were included in the provisions of the JPA. This is the North American Basin. These are the groundwater sustainability agencies within the North American Basin, and you see there are 5 here. Again, this goes from the American River to the south, the Sacramento River to the west, and the Bear River to the north. 5 GSAs. Under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, you need to have some coordination amongst these GSAs. Altogether, they are forming one groundwater sustainability plan to help manage the basin. That groundwater sustainability plan is being developed right now, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the timing of the development of those plans and when they need to be completed and submitted and implemented. Groundwater sustainability agencies in the South American and Solano basins. Here's a map of that. It includes a part of the North American Basin, but you can see, again, there are a number of entities in there. I invite for questions to be directed to Daryl Eck or to Linda if you have specific questions about the Solano or South American basins or the Consumnes Basin. Consumnes Basin at the south part of the county. Here are the entities that are groundwater sustainability agencies that make up that portion of Sacramento County.
Could I ask a quick question regarding Consumnes?
Certainly.
There was some question as to the dividing line between the river there and there was jurisdictional issues, it seemed like, with the Consumnes Basin. Did they work that out?
Yes, I'm Daryl Eck, the Executive Director of the Sacramento Central Groundwater Authority. And the question you're asking is about a question that emanated over a basin boundary modification that was being pursued by the Slough House Resource Conservation District. Slough House Resource Conservation District felt strongly that the boundary between the South American Subbasin and the Consumnes Subbasin should roughly follow along Grant Line Road. The members of the Sacramento Central Groundwater Authority disagreed with that. There's really no scientific evidence that would support that. That was the contention that was made to state DWR regarding that question, and state DWR found that there wasn't really a basis for making that basin boundary modification.
Okay, so they did settle it.
So, and the question has been asked twice, and presumably it can come up every 5 years because that's the frequency that Department of Water Resources looks at modifying what they call Bulletin 118, which defines the boundaries of groundwater subbasins. So hopefully we're going to be able to work through that so that that question doesn't come up again in the future. But it's been settled twice that the basin boundary should remain where it is.
So if my memory serves, it was because they were using water from the other, they felt since they were using part of that water, they should have wanted to have control over it, the management of it. Is that what the issue was?
I think a lot of the argument centers on that the area is primarily agricultural and that the Consumnes Subbasin is primarily an agricultural area, so because that there was an affinity for agriculture that they should be together. But it really kind of ignores the fact that there are many, many additional hundreds of acres of agriculture that wouldn't have even been considered as part of that discussion. So it really wasn't a strong argument to say that, we're all agriculture, so we should all be together. And like I say, there was really no scientific support of making that change. If for some reason scientific information comes up in the future that would support that, I would imagine that the stakeholders would all take that under consideration. But as of this date, there's nothing that supports that basin boundary modification.
And they can bring that up every 5 years? They can challenge the lines every 5 years
In theory, yes, they can.
on all the groundwater basins?
That would apply to groundwater basins statewide. So if that question existed in other groundwater basins, yes, that question could be brought up again.
Thank you.
So I should add that while SGMA provides for the creation of GSAs, groundwater sustainability agencies, and they're forming in order to facilitate the management of groundwater, there are places where they don't exist, and they call that white space. I think that exists to some degree in Sacramento County, and the county is the backstop for that, for those areas. So I thought I would talk about the Sacramento Groundwater Authority again and its organizational powers. Sacramento Groundwater Authority was used as the example for SGMA when it was passed by the legislature. Roger Dickinson, or Assemblymember Dickinson, used the SGA as the example of how groundwater should be managed in California. There are similar powers that are granted by SGMA or not granted. The SGA is not authorized to regulate land use. SGMA doesn't give that power to the SGA also. They're not engaged to retail sale of water. Under the Joint Powers Authority, the SGA was not authorized to limit or restrict extractions. But SGMA allows that to go on. SGMA does give that power to the SGA. If we ever have to utilize that power in this basin, I'm not exactly sure how we're going to deal with that. That is something to be resolved. It might have to be a change in the JPA, but regardless, SGMA does provide that power. It's not authorized to fund capital construction projects. Here's some more authorities for the SGA, which mirror SGMA. On the left-hand side, you see what the SGA is authorized to do, and the SGA has done it in the past. On the right, you see what they're authorized to do, but they haven't elected to use those powers. Cause taxes, assessments, or fees. That's actually how the SGA is funded. There is a fee assigned to or assessed based on the amount of groundwater that you produce. It's authorized to carry on studies and other technical investigations. It's authorized to acquire property convenient to exercise the power of the authority. But that is something that the SGA has not taken up or has not exercised. Again, SGMA provides very similar authorities to groundwater agencies. Okay, a little bit about the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. Passed in 2014, it was recognized during the drought that groundwater was being used unsustainably in a number of areas in California. I think there were a lot of articles that were written about subsidence and other problems. It was set to establish benchmarks and criteria that groundwater agencies need to manage to, but it also gives a fair amount of local control for setting those benchmarks. If an agency or a basin doesn't manage, there is a backstop, and that's the state coming in and doing the enforcement for you. Sustainability, how is that measured? There are 6 undesirable results in SGMA. lowering groundwater levels unreasonably, a reduction of storage in the groundwater basin, seawater intrusion, degraded water quality, land subsidence, and surface water depletion. Many people in the business call these the six deadly sins of Sigma. I'm going to get to that in a little bit about how that might affect the basins within the Sacramento County area. Basin prioritization. The reason why I'm showing this slide is basins are prioritized in a couple different ways. This affects the schedule of when a groundwater sustainability plan needs to be developed. The bottom line is it's either 2020 or 2022, depending on where your basin is, if it's a high or medium priority, if it's a critically overdrafted basin. In Sacramento County, we don't have that. The groundwater sustainability plans are due in 2022. But in other parts of the state, in many areas of the state, they are due in 2020. Again, Sigma was passed because of the unsustainable rate of groundwater extraction. We don't have as much a problem here in Sacramento Valley because we have plentiful water resources. This is where most of the water comes from, the north part of the state. A little bit more of a challenge in the San Joaquin Basin, definitely a challenge in the Tulare Basin. You see the groundwater extraction over time from 1925 to 2016. This ends during the drought, but in this region, it seems like the groundwater basins are recovering, so I would expect to see that line go up a little bit. Again, this was formed, this figure was put together at the end of the drought. Why should we care about this law? Well, there could be limits on groundwater pumping. That could affect growth. It could increase taxes or fees, particularly if there's a state takeover and we lose control of management. Again, the state could come in and make decisions for us, and I don't think any of us would like to see that happen. But the water agencies are doing all they can to keep the decisions at the local level. Consequences of failure, mandated pumping or mandated meters, water planning fees. The state would come in and prepare a plan if we failed to make a plan. These would all be problematic. It's really good to maintain our local control and do our planning on our own. I talked about this earlier. These are the 6 deadly sins of Sigma. I'm going to go into it a little bit more specifically about how it affects this area. The takeaway from this slide is we will decide or we determine how we measure these things. There are some criteria that have been developed through the passage of the law and the regulatory process, but it's up to us to characterize these sustainability definitions for our own basins. Another important thing, and I have another slide on this, but once we develop a groundwater sustainability plan in 2022, we have 20 years to bring the basin within the performance goals that define sustainable management. Important parts of a groundwater sustainability plan: who, what, where, how. Who pumps water? How is it used? It's important to include the basin setting, where the groundwater is, the quality. Also in that process, we're going to identify what those measures are specific to the basins for sustainability. How we're going to measure sustainability. There are things that we need to do, like put in groundwater wells to determine if a basin is being pumped too hard and the groundwater elevation is being lowered, or if contamination is migrating. How we're going to do those things. All these make up the groundwater sustainability plan, which the various GSAs, either collectively or separately, are preparing. little bit more about the schedule. Some of this is history. GSA formation and coordination occurred from 2014 to 2017. You may recall that the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act was passed in 2014. It really took into effect in 2015. Groundwater sustainability plans, there needed to be some notification of the development and adoption of those plans. There are requirements in SGMA for communications and communicating that to the community and stakeholders. We're in phase 3 right now, where we're developing some of those budgets. An important part of a groundwater sustainability plan. 2020 or 2022, that's when the rubber hits the road, and we need to start implementing the plan and bringing those basins into a sustainable management phase. Here is that graphic sort of laid out. Again, 2022, early in the year, we need to start implementing the groundwater sustainability plan. I want to talk about 4 of those criteria for this region. So surface water depletion, that's where if you're pumping too much groundwater, you're interfering with stream flows. That can be dependent on where you site a well. If you have a well close to the river, that could be a problem. It could be a problem for groundwater-dependent ecosystems. If you deplete surface water too much and dry out a groundwater-dependent ecosystem, that could cause a problem. We're going to be identifying those types of things and coming up with plans to prevent that from happening. Degraded water quality. We have some contaminant plumes within the region. We have McClellan and Mather Air Force Base and Aerojet. It would be a problem if we have a management regime which allowed for that contamination to spread. So the GSP has to address those types of things. Lowering groundwater elevations is another criteria under SGMA that you need to watch out for and plan for. This is a well within the basin north of the American River, and what you see here is continued groundwater decline for a period of time until some of the agencies built surface water infrastructure to bring in surface water and manage the basin. Again, this is the Sacramento Groundwater Authority basin. That was the intent of the Groundwater Authority, was to help facilitate this process and arrest the decline. You see it going to just last year. You see where the drought began in 2014, coincidental with the passage of SGMA, and then the recovery. SGMA and its passage in its going into effect in 2015 actually sets a lot of benchmarks. One of the things that we cannot do is really lower groundwater levels unreasonably as they were established in 2015. Land subsidence. This gets a lot of press. Many people have, or you might have read articles that in the San Joaquin Valley there are levels which continue to decline because of unsustainable groundwater management practices, too much groundwater being pumped. There's a famous picture that you see on the left side which shows where the groundwater surface elevation was in 1925, 1955, and 1977. It's probably gone down more since then. There are some places in the Sacramento Valley, including around Arbuckle. Here's the good news. This doesn't happen in this area. We are blessed with a certain type of geology that has made it such that we haven't seen this level of subsidence here, even though we had a lot of groundwater that was pumped. I would even say there's a little bit of an upside to pumping all that groundwater because it has created some space to put surface water once we get around to banking that in the future. And we have plans within this region to do that and use that space conjunctively.
What causes it? What causes the subsidence in the Central Valley? Is it because they pumped? Is it a different soil?
It is a different soil. What's happening is in the Central Valley and other places, you have these clay deposits, and the water comes out of that clay, and it's hard for clay to absorb water back, and it just dries out and subsides. It's not to say that we don't have clay layers in this region, but typically the geology and the way that groundwater is pumped, it doesn't affect it to the same. It doesn't affect it where we see this massive amounts of subsidence. We have had a little subsidence over that period to the tune of about 2 feet within this region. That is not significant, and it's not like a telephone pole's amount of subsidence that you see in this area in the San Joaquin Valley, and then even more so since that photograph was taken.
Is it possible to go back to the slide before this one?
Yes.
No, the next one. I'm assuming the pink and the yellow are the contaminated areas?
That's correct.
And that is within the groundwater basin?
That is.
And is that connected to other is that connected to the entire basin beyond the contaminated? Does that contaminate the whole basin, or how does that
Yeah, it's a good
travel?
question, Chair Frost. So within the McClellan contamination area, which I understand is fairly well contained right now, and the Air Force continues to remediate that and treat for that, and eventually they are going to complete that remediation process. That's solely in the basin north of the American River. In this picture here, you can see Folsom Reservoir to the right-hand side, and there's sort of a blue line which delineates the basin boundaries. There's the North American Basin and the South American Basin. Those contamination plumes are largely within the South American Basin. There has been some contaminant transport, some migration of that because of pumping. You'll see that some of that has actually crossed that blue line and gone into the North Basin. That is being watched very carefully, and Daryl might be able to speak to this better than I can. But there are attempts to halt that contamination and actually treat that contamination. But it is, as I understand it right now, it is largely isolated. Daryl can probably speak better to how well a job that Aerojet is doing, or the Air Force, in terms of the contaminants seeping farther. Yes, it's in the groundwater. It's something to watch out for. Under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, something that you have to study is and verify is a management regime that doesn't create more problems by allowing that contamination to move farther.
But the people that are living there, are they drinking, is that water being treated then, or are they drinking other water? How is the water managed?
Yes, so Aerojet and the Air Force have very active programs that are going on to contain the extent of the plume. It's something that is a constant focus of their activity. So the extent of the plume has probably not really changed very much over the last 10 to 15 years because of the implementation of what they call the remedy. And what they do is they extract that water, treat it, and for the most part, it's discharged into tributaries to the American River. And there are programs that are in place that actually capture some of that water that's been treated and discharged. Golden State Water Company, which operates in Rancho Cordova, has an agreement with the Carmichael Water District where they divert 5,000 acre feet a year of remediated groundwater. and then that is treated and then conveyed back to Golden State's customers. So it's not a direct reuse, but it is a reuse of remediated groundwater. The Sacramento County Water Agency also has an agreement with Aerojet for 8,900 acre-feet of groundwater that is discharged into the American River, and they recover that at their diversion structure on the Sacramento River. Again, it's not a direct reuse of this remediated groundwater, but it is a reuse of the water itself. There are, if I remember correctly, I do think that there are some facilities within Rancho Cordova where they actually treat the water on site of the groundwater extraction well, and then it is pumped into the distribution system. But all of those things are closely monitored for contaminants that can't exceed the maximum contaminant levels that are part of the remedy. So it's all very closely watched and monitored. And like I say, the extent of the plume has not really changed over the past 10, 15 years. But it's going to be an operation that's going to go on for quite some time into the future.
And then just one more, and then Director Jones has a question. On the McClellan, I'm told that the groundwater at McClellan is lower than Rio Linda, and I get complaints about how McClellan is bleeding into Rio Linda. Is it true that the topography, or is there concern relating to the contamination of water in Rio Linda from McClellan still? And how is that being managed?
I can say something in general about that, but maybe Jim has something more specific. I mean, one of the reasons why they pump at these contamination sites is to create what they call a cone of depression, so that it contains the contamination to one particular site so that it doesn't continue to spread. I mean, again, my recollection in the McClellan area is that they had issues in the past where contamination was migrating off-site and was contaminating residential wells in that area. I believe those wells were taken out of service, and those people were connected up to the Rio Linda Alberta Water District water system so that problem was solved. But I think, probably for the most part, again, that the contaminant plume is probably pretty much contained onto the McClellan site. And, if people do experience lowering groundwater levels, again, it's probably because they're implementing their remedy to try to keep the contaminants from migrating off-site.
That's right. That's right. I'm going to add to what Daryl said, that when several years ago there was a concern about the contaminant plume migrating to the west, and there are a number of residents that were taken off wells and connected to the public supply. Daryl had said Rio Linda, but it also happened in the city of Sacramento too. And yes, it is being contained on site. It is lowering. The Air Force would like to keep the water surface elevation at a certain point to make it easier to remove the contaminants. If the groundwater levels were to go up substantially, it would actually interfere with the remediation of the contamination at McClellan.
And Director Jones had a question.
Thank you, Chair Frost. Thank you. You mentioned 8,900 acre-feet coming out of the Aerojet. Where's the majority of that getting treated?
You want to field that one?
So Dave Underwood, Water Resources. So Sacramento County Water Agency,
We can hardly hear you.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
The Sacramento County Water Agency has an agreement with Aerojet, like Daryl was mentioning. So 8,900 acre feet goes into the American River, comes down, and then we take it out of the Sacramento River. Carmichael also has an agreement with Aerojet, and I forget how much, but they also extract that water out of the American River once it's put in the American River.
So what I heard sounds a little crazy. 8,900 is put directly into the American River?
After it's treated, yes.
Okay, that's what I'm getting. Okay, and
Yeah,
where
yeah.
is it treated?
That particular treatment process is on Mather Air Force Base. They have a large treatment facility off of Douglas Road.
Okay, so that takes care of the contaminated water from Aerojet.
Yes.
Correct. Okay, thank you. And a quick throwback here. I believe someone mentioned, is 2015 the marker for groundwater elevation? You mentioned something like going forward, because we looked at 1932 and it was 3 times the amount.
Yeah, largely it's 2015.
So wherever things were in 2015, that's our standard now?
I understand that for the most part. What I've been advised under this is 2015 is the benchmark. We can't continue to take groundwater elevations down.
Okay.
In past planning efforts, for example, in the basin north of the American River, we have talked about a sustainable yield number of 131,000 acre feet, with the understanding that the groundwater elevations would continue to decline. That number is obsolete now. And we could experience problems with decreased surface water elevations. The benchmark was set with the passage of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and that largely defines where groundwater elevations should be managed at. There could be some exceptions to that rule. I'm not familiar with what those exceptions are. In the Sacramento Groundwater Authority area, we are using the groundwater elevations that were established in 2015 as the benchmark and managing to that location.
Are you done?
I have a couple more. but I
Okay,
can
go,
wait.
no, oh, do you want to wait?
Your pleasure.
Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. I have 2 other questions here. DWA, are you drilling your own wells for monitoring and keeping track of potential contaminants, as well as lowering elevation?
The SGA has constructed monitoring wells, and we go out and take well sample elevations. We're also using other wells and other agencies' wells to monitor groundwater elevations too. So it is a collaborative effort. Some of those, data points are being taken by SGA staff, but we're relying on other information too.
Okay, thank you. Then another quick one. Do we know what the status of measuring private wells is?
That could be. I don't have the answer to that question. I do not know how we measure that, but I'd like to get a little bit more specificity for that. Are you talking about, are we relying on private wells, for example, for where the groundwater elevation is, or are you asking about quality?
Well, probably the whole ballywick. Remember when in 2013, 2014, when Sigma was coming up, and it was quite the situation where apparently California was the only Western state that didn't monitor private well extraction.
Right.
And that was the big discussion, and I just am trying to catch up on where we are on that discussion.
I don't have an answer to that question, and I don't know if any of my colleagues have some background on monitoring private wells.
Gentlemen.
No problem.
So the county's had a program for decades. In fact, Daryl used to have it under his group, where we do have quite a few private wells that we just go out and we look at the groundwater levels. We don't monitor how much they extract. and we monitored that over time. But as far as I know, that's the only monitoring of private wells that are performed currently.
Elevation levels.
Right.
Thank you.
Right. Unless somebody else, there he is.
Yeah, just to add to that, Sigma provides certain exemptions. They say that if you're a de minimis user, that if you pump less than 2 acre-feet a year, then they really don't expect there to be any kind of metering or monitoring as far as a quantity of water that's pumped. But I think, as Jim had mentioned earlier in his presentation, I mean, certainly there are powers and authorities that are out there, should a decision be made in the future that that's necessary, given that there's some sort of extraordinary situation that's occurring. You may want to look at that possibility, but it's not something that's being contemplated. And certainly, I think in a lot of the agricultural residential communities and such like that, there's not really a lot of support for that concept. So, again, something extraordinary would probably have to occur before you could get, wide support for pursuing something like that.
If we had in your graph where you show that the groundwater pumping is depleting reservoirs, and it shows Sacramento Valley just slightly depleted now, and we're out of the drought. I don't know where we would be now, because that's like 2016, but the question I have relates to the Delta tunnels and the water situation there. Would we be using pumping groundwater then to feed that water, that Delta tunnel? I'm not on that board.
Yeah, I think I can address that question.
Okay. And will it deplete it even further? I mean,
Right.
That doesn't look like a good situation.
So this is an area north of the American River, and I understand the Delta tunnels would be constructed in an area south of the city of Sacramento, maybe a couple miles south of the city of Sacramento. The intent of, as I understand, the proponents of the Delta tunnels are they would divert surface water. It would be released from upstream reservoirs, say Oroville Reservoir. If there were federal contractors involved, it could be Shasta or Folsom. That said, I understood that Sacramento County's protest on the Delta tunnels did include some sort of groundwater analysis and brought that up as an issue in the construction of the Delta tunnels. The water supply for the Delta tunnels, or that would be sent through the Delta tunnels, is not really intended to be groundwater, though. It's intended to be surface water, according to the project proponents. Chair Frost, did I answer your question?
Yes, but surface water does recharge groundwater.
It does indeed.
It does. It could potentially impact our water. So that is a concern, right?
It is a concern. In discussions with other water users that might benefit from the Delta tunnels, sometimes they have taken issue with us, and they have said, if you pump too much groundwater, it takes too much water out of the rivers. And they are making the argument from time to time that we are impacting their operation. I guess where I want to come back to is there is a surface water groundwater interaction element that we need to study, that we're not impacting one another, and that's part of the groundwater sustainability plan.
Thank you.
So I'm going to jump to a little bit of the tie between land use and urban water management planning and some of the legislation there. The Urban Water Management Planning Act requires urban water agencies that have 3,000 or more connections to prepare what's called an urban water management plan. It has to identify the sources of water. There are planning requirements, including planning for droughts or interruptions in supply. Related to this were a couple bills that were passed called the Show Me the Water legislation some years back. They are Senate Bill 610 and Senate Bill 221. The intent of that was to tie urban water management plans together with land use planning. Both urban water management plans and Senate Bill 610 are intended for a water agency, or actually a land use agency and a water agency. Sometimes they're different, but a land use agency to have a process to verify if there is sufficient water from a water agency. Sometimes they're the same, and that could be in the case of the city of Sacramento or the city of Folsom that is the water supplier. They need to prepare what's called a water supply assessment, which verifies that there is a sufficient water supply. There has to be some details in that. There also needs to be written verification with substantial evidence for that in the planning process. I have a figure here which shows the responsibility for a city or county or a land use agency and a water supplier. It goes through the steps and the ties here. A general plan needs to be developed. On the water supplier side, an urban water management plan. You can think of those as somewhat analogous. As the process is going through specific plans, there needs to be, again, a detailed water supply analysis. It goes through a zoning action, then a tentative map. Senate Bill 221 requires that there has to be written verification of a water supply, and that's on the water supplier to provide that to the land use agency. After these things are developed, it allows for developments to occur. I should add that these are generally developments that are greater than 500 units. That is the tie between land use and water supply. I would say that there is a robust body of law on that requirement, and there are a number of people who might say that there isn't a sufficient tie, but I would argue that there is a sufficient tie between water supply and land use. The reason why I put this in here is because I thought it would be of interest to the commissioners. Often your mandate is to conduct municipal service reviews. I understand that you might need to rely on a CEQA document. These are all components that eventually get rolled up into a CEQA document. It's not a CEQA analysis in and of itself, but it is something that does get rolled up into that to provide that fail-safe mechanism to make sure that there's adequate water supply. Where does SGMA come in with this? SGMA is another layer to make sure that groundwater is being managed appropriately. I'm going to roll this back in. There are groundwater sustainability agencies that are tasked with developing groundwater sustainability plans. They need to make sure that the 6 elements of SGMA, or the undesirable results, are not occurring, that those need to be completed in Sacramento County by 2022, and there is a 20-year period that allows for the implementation of that. When there is a development which is being considered, or an annexation that is being considered, I believe that would be addressed in a CEQA document, and the CEQA document will likely rely on the groundwater sustainability plan and its findings in order to establish if there is sufficient groundwater for the project.
What's happening now?
That doesn't happen right now, but there are other mechanisms that are in place right now, various CEQA documents for this region. Many documents tier off the water form agreement document, which established the sustainable yield of the 3 basins that are of most importance here. The CEQA document established the sustainable yield in those regions. In the North Basin, there is a sustainable yield of 131,000 acre feet. In the Central Basin, I believe it's 273,000 acre feet. Many documents have tiered off those documents since they have been written. They might have been updated a little bit since then with various water supply management plans, but the basis of those still exist. And I understand that the CEQA documents, if they can demonstrate, and I'm not a CEQA expert, but if they can demonstrate that we are not interfering with the sustainable yield of those basins, we're okay. I think that once we have adoption of the groundwater sustainability plans, it's going to be examined through a different lens. It's going to be examined with those 6 undesirable results in mind. And it's quite possible that those numbers that were generated through those previous analyses for sustainable yield may become obsolete. So there will be a different standard in a couple of years.
Just for the benefit of the commission, I want to remind y'all that when you do make decisions on why there is no land use authority with your commission, when you are making decisions on annexations, that requires pre-zoning by the local entity, land use agency, city. And in order to do that pre-zoning, that's where the CEQA ties in. And LAFCo, as a responsible agency, makes a comment towards the necessity of a sustainable water plan. And so those are findings your commission does have the information available, and you make those findings before you take an action. That's distinct from when you do your reviews of a sphere of influence where there is no development immediate or pending as a result of that decision. So it's often an opportunity for your commission, which you'd take advantage of, to impose a condition on the local entity to satisfy that requirement when they want to, again, take action within their sphere of influence, move forward with the land use decision, and during their pre-zoning process, they have to check that box, and that gives you the information you need. So we're addressing by today's standards, and we will, as always, continue to modify, and that's one of the benefits of having these discussions tonight.
Thank you.
That concludes my presentation.
That was very interesting. Any questions or comments?
So by 2022, we might have more concrete guidelines, so to speak,
Yes.
Evaluating those 6 deadly sins or whatever they were.
Right. The 6 deadly sins of Sigma. But I'll also add that the legislature, or I should say Sigma, allows for 20 years after that for basins to become sustainably managed. That is a long period of time. I don't think that's as much of a problem in this part of the state. It's a significant problem for areas that lack a sufficient water supply in the San Joaquin Valley and some other parts of the state. But the criteria will be established in the groundwater sustainability plan. So stay tuned. We'll have that those groundwater sustainability plans put together by January 2022 and submitted to the state, and we'll be operating to them.
We'll wait for bated breath for that, huh?
Oh, I know. I wonder if it's, if the future of water is going to change the landscape a little with agriculture, and you kind of wonder.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Jim.
Thank you.
Okay, our next item is item number 5, fiscal year 2018-19 annual financial audit report, and this is a receive and file.
Correct. This is the annual report that your commission is authorized, and we exercise every year. This keeps us up to date as far as the most recently closed fiscal year. No irregularities were discovered. The audit signed off on our operations. They did make a mention of tightening up some of our, we don't deal with cash, as you're aware. We do deal with largely invoices through the county system. And if we do receive checks from applicants, one of the suggestions is that we tighten up our tracking of those, the date they come in, and get them deposited as quickly as possible. So that's something we're constantly trying to refine. Otherwise, the audit stands well for your commission. Happy to answer any questions.
I do not see any questions, and so with that, we will move on to the next item, which is item number 6, the nomination of our chair and vice chair for calendar year 2020. Did you want to?
Certainly. By commission tradition, the chair serves for a period of 1 year. The standing vice chair rotates into that seat, and then there's an established rotation of those of the various seats. So there's constant representation of the special districts, the cities, the public members, and the county as well. So as we come up to the end of the year here, we're in recess in January, and then the first meeting will be in February. By their own local traditions, both the county board of supervisors and the city of Sacramento City Council make their appointments to this commission annually in January. So right now, the city of Sacramento, I recommend that your commission identify the city chair, not the entity, not the individual, but the chair as the appropriate incoming chairperson of the commission, and then Commissioner Little as the special district member, at the pleasure of your commission, would move to the vice chair's position.
Okay. Do we have a?
Madam Chair, I make the motion that we follow staff's recommendation.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Oh, please vote. And motion carries unanimously, and so we have a new chair and vice chair. Thank you, Chris, for being willing to serve. And our next item is
Commissioner
Executive
Frost, just
officer.
one note that won't take effect until January 1st of 2020, so it's not currently.
okay, and that brings me to, I will be out of town for the December meeting, and I believe my alternate supervisor, Cerna, will not be able to be here.
Right. That kind of moves us right along the agenda. I have some. I was going to raise that point if the chair is finished.
Yeah, I'm finished, and we'll move on to executive officer comments.
Please, I thank you for that. We do have one more meeting scheduled. That would be the December meeting. We have nothing time sensitive from an entitlement standpoint scheduled for December. We are working on 2 municipal service reviews, one with Rancho Murrieta Community Services District. We're expecting, our target is to get a draft to your commission at the December hearing, and also the El Paso Manor Water District. We're also working with them. They're looking to have that same date for their draft review. Again, not necessarily time sensitive. We understand there's holiday schedules coming up. 4 commissioners represent a quorum. 4 commissioners represent the basis for making decisions, business decisions. But I leave it to the pleasure of your commission, those of you who are here, of course, that we know that, right, the county representatives aren't available. I don't know the availability of others. We can do a polling on that. But if it's the pleasure of your commission, we can go dark in December and reconvene in February. I can pass that along to the affected districts.
What's the pleasure? Are the MSRs, that is not, there's no pressing
No, they're
item
not,
there?
they're not time sensitive. We're just going through, you may recall a couple of meetings ago, we discussed doing a refresh of the MSRs. And these are the leading edge of those. Two of the folks that are, have stepped up to move things along, so we appreciate their assistance.
Do you want to go dark in December? That sounds good.
That sounds expedient.
Yes, I think we like the idea of going dark in December.
So the first meeting of next year will be February. That will be when we have the transition of commission chair and vice chair, and by that time, the appointment should be made by Sac City Council. So we'll know the commissioner there and the Sac County Board. Thank you.
Okay.
That's all I have.
Do we have anything from the directors, commissioners? With that, this meeting is adjourned.